Well, good afternoon. I'm Susan Shirk, and it's great to be here with you. I am an old China hand. I've been traveling to China and doing research there since 1971. I've taught at UCSD almost 40 years. And the thing about studying China is that just when you think you've got it figured out, things happen that really surprise you. So I'm going to talk today about one topic that really surprises me, which is the style of leadership we see emerging in China. But it also gives me the opportunity to let you know that we now have a very exciting program on contemporary China, a social science program based at the School of International Relations Pacific Studies called the 21st Century China Program. Check it out, china.ucsd.edu. We have 12 social scientists working on contemporary China, doing original research that we then translate into knowledge that can be used by policymakers and business people. And we do a lot of our work collaboratively with the most exciting young social science researchers in China. So this is something very new and exciting, and I hope that you'll come talk to me afterwards and hear a little bit more about it. You know, the pattern of leadership that one generally sees in an authoritarian regime is they start out as revolutionary systems with usually charismatic leaders, a Mao Zedong, a Kim Il-sung, a Fidel Castro. And then as they become governing communist parties and as they need to adapt to a more urban, better educated society, they generally move to collective leadership and more institutionalized leadership. And that's the pattern that we saw in China after Mao died in 1976. And Deng Xiaoping introduced market reforms, 1979. And then we had leaders like Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. And these people were first among equals in the Standing Committee of the Politburo. They were pretty colorless figures. They were kind of interchangeable with one another, technocrats, and not people who were anything like Mao Zedong or even Deng Xiaoping. But Xi Jinping, the current General Secretary of the party, who's also the president and head of the military, he is doing something different. And I'm trying to figure out why this has happened and what its consequences will be for both domestic politics and foreign policy. Now, the fact that Xi Jinping is kind of modeling his leadership style on Mao Zedong is really perplexing, because he and his father, who was a major Chinese leader who went on the Long March with Mao and Deng, they are both victims of Mao Zedong's style of rule. They were targeted in the Cultural Revolution and suffered greatly. And yet, we see Xi Jinping kind of becoming a Mao-like personalistic dictator in the mold of Mao Zedong. Now, I don't want to overdo this. Xi Jinping is not Mao Zedong in many different respects, but it is more a personalistic and highly concentrated pattern of rule. Xi made himself the head of a number of leading small groups in charge of everything from the economic reforms to internet censorship and security to foreign policy. You name it, Xi Jinping has made himself in charge of it and created a kind of ad hoc interagency group with people he knows well running the offices, and he's in charge. And this is something very new. What we want to see in particular is whether or not this is actually going to help implement the ambitious market reforms, a set of market reforms that were introduced about a year and a half ago? If so, then maybe we'll say that Xi Jinping's another Deng Xiaoping. But if these reforms don't get implemented, and so far they've been pretty slow, then we're going to have to say that Xi Jinping is another Mao and not another Deng Xiaoping, and certainly the consequences will be very negative for China. Now, Xi Jinping, as you see here, he likes to portray himself as the children love him, just like the children loved Mao in these propaganda posters. Xi Jinping is actually extremely popular. After having, for years, having this kind of colorless, dull leaders, it's so exciting to have a strongman leader. And of course, in countries like China and the United States, we like strong leaders. And people really like him. He's got a beautiful wife, very talented. He likes to go out and sort of mix with ordinary people. So one thing we really have to remember is that, so far at least, this more dictatorial type figure is very popular in China. But one of the most puzzling things about him is that he's kind of what in China they call reversing the verdicts. He's reversing the verdicts on the Mao era. The Mao era was, from Deng Xiaoping on, people have been very critical of the tragic consequences of Mao Zedong's rule. The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution. You know, when you have an autocratic dictatorial leader like that and nobody dares to say no to you, you can take the country off a cliff, which is basically what Mao did. And yet, Xi Jinping has revived a lot of ideological concepts from the Mao era. He said that the Mao period was just as good as the post-Mao reform period. And he has ramped up ideological education in the schools, people studying Marxism, Mao Zedong thought. He's also encouraged a tightening up of censorship over the media, over the internet, over all forms of culture. Non-governmental organizations are finding it very difficult to function. So this is very puzzling to me. You know, this is a man who suffered during the Mao era, and yet he's returning to reviving a lot of these Mao era patterns and ideological concepts. And so one tentative hypothesis is that, and this is very surprising, that Mao Zedong's theory, Mao Zedong's ideas, still have surprising traction with the Chinese public. Perhaps in part because young people have not been educated at all in the schools about the tragic consequences of Mao Zedong rule. Now, one of the most interesting things that Xi Jinping is doing is that he's purging his rivals in a massive anti-corruption campaign that is designed to both restore the integrity of the party and therefore bolster support for the party, clean up all the rot in the party, but also he's not targeted one person close to himself. Everybody who has been targeted is a potential rival. And this creates a real risk of a backlash within the elite, even something as dramatic as an elite coup. Xi Jinping's taken charge of the military more directly than either of the two previous leaders. And of course, he's also played to the growing nationalism within the country. But what's interesting, and one thing I want to suggest, is that, in fact, a strong leader who concentrates a lot of power may lead to a more cautious and restrained foreign policy. It doesn't necessarily lead to a more aggressive policy, because in the Hu Jintao era, a lot of agencies, bureaucracies, were going their own way and provoking fights with China's neighbors, even things like the Fisheries Bureau, the Maritime Surveillance Bureau, provoking fights in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. So here, Xi Jinping is making the firm determination that, yes, we will have more military diplomacy. So, in other words, this kind of strongman rule doesn't necessarily lead to aggressive behavior internationally. And we see that with the United States, even with Japan, which is the hot button issue of domestic politics in China, and not so much with Russia. And in fact, many people pointed out to me that at the APEC meeting, Xi Jinping spent 9 hours with President Obama, more than all the other leaders who were there put together, including Putin. So one thing to watch out for here, as we see Xi Jinping's leadership develop in the future over the next few years, here's to watch out for. Look to see, are those market reforms getting implemented? Look to see whether or not there is an elite backlash to the anti-corruption campaign, which is also a kind of purge. And in foreign policy, look toward President Xi's state visit to Washington and perhaps to California in September to see whether or not he's going to use his authority to prevent the risks of international conflict to China, which I think might very well happen. Thanks very much.